Welcome back to Dark Revenge Chronicles, where justice wears a black mask and vengeance walks in shadows. Today's story will take you on a journey through the darkest corners of human nature, where love becomes obsession, trust becomes betrayal, and revenge becomes art. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but what happens when that dish has been marinating in hatred for 15 long years? What happens when the person seeking revenge isn't who you think they are? And what happens when the very act of revenge reveals a truth so devastating that it destroys everyone involved? This is the story of Elena Vasquez, Marcus Blackwood, and a portrait that changed everything. But I warn you, by the end of this tale, you'll question everything you thought you knew about justice, love, and the price we pay for our sins. Let's begin. 15 years ago, in the prestigious art district of San Francisco, Elena Vasquez was the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. At 25, she possessed that rare combination of classical beauty and fierce intelligence that made her irresistible to artists, writers and dreamers alike. Elena worked as a curator at the Meridian Gallery, one of the city's most exclusive art spaces. She had an eye for talent that bordered on supernatural. She could spot a future masterpiece in a crowded exhibition of mediocre work. But more than that, she had a gift for seeing the soul of an artist through their creation. That's how she met Marcus Blackwood. Marcus was different from the usual artists who sought her attention. Where others were loud and desperate for validation, Marcus was quiet, intense, almost mysterious. His paintings were dark, emotional landscapes that seemed to bleed off the canvas. When Elena first saw his work, she felt something she'd never experienced before. A deep, almost painful recognition. As if she were looking at her own soul, rendered in oil and shadow. Their love affair began like a masterpiece taking shape. Slow at first, careful brushstrokes of conversation and stolen glances. Marcus would bring Elena small sketches, her hands holding a coffee cup, her profile in the morning light, her eyes when she thought no one was watching. "You see me?" she whispered to him one evening as they stood in his cluttered studio. Surrounded by canvases that seemed to breathe with life. "I paint what I love," he replied, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. "And I've never loved anything the way I love you." Elena believed him. God help her, she believed every word. Within 6 months, they were living together in Marcus's converted warehouse studio. Elena would wake to find new paintings of her everywhere. Elena laughing, Elena sleeping, Elena lost in thought. She was his muse, his obsession, his entire world captured in 1,000 different moments. But there was one painting Marcus kept covered, hidden away in the corner of his studio. When Elena asked about it, his eyes would grow distant. "It's not finished yet," he would say. "When it's ready, you'll be the first to see it." Elena thought it was meant to be a surprise, perhaps a proposal rendered in paint. She had no idea it would become the instrument of her destruction. The first crack in their perfect world appeared on a rainy Thursday in October. Elena came home early from the gallery to find Marcus on the phone, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "I told you, I need more time," she heard him say. "The plan has to be perfect. She can't suspect anything." When he saw Elena standing in the doorway, Marcus's face went white. He quickly ended the call. "Work call?" he said, but his smile was strained. "You know how demanding clients can be." Elena wanted to believe him. Love has a way of making us blind to the truth, even when that truth is staring us in the face. But doubt, once planted, grows like a cancer. She began noticing things. How Marcus would quickly close his laptop when she entered the room. The way he would disappear for hours without explanation. The fact that despite living together for months, she had never met any of his friends or family. And then there were the questions. Casual at first, but increasingly probing. Marcus wanted to know everything about Elena's past, her family, her finances. He seemed particularly interested in her inheritance, a substantial sum left to her by her grandmother. Money Elena had never touched, never even thought about. "Just curious," Marcus would say when Elena questioned his interest. "I want to know everything about the woman I love." But Elena was starting to realize she knew nothing about the man she thought she loved. The truth has a way of revealing itself, often when we least expect it. For Elena, that moment came on a cold December evening, when Marcus thought she was at a gallery opening across town. Elena had felt unwell and decided to return home early. As she approached their building, she saw Marcus through the window, pacing frantically while talking on his phone. But it wasn't his agitated state that froze her blood. It was what she could see behind him, the covered painting in the corner. It wasn't covered anymore. Elena crept closer to the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. What she saw made her world collapse. The painting was of her, yes, but not the Elena she thought Marcus saw. This Elena was lifeless, cold, her eyes vacant and staring. She was surrounded by symbols, money, jewelry, legal documents. And at the bottom of the canvas, in Marcus's distinctive script, were the words, "The Mark." Elena stumbled backward, her mind reeling. The Mark. She wasn't his muse. She wasn't his love. She was his target. Over the next few days, Elena became a detective in her own life. She hired a private investigator, accessed records, followed paper trails. What she discovered shattered not just her heart, but her entire understanding of reality. Marcus Blackwood wasn't even his real name. He was Martin Blake, a con artist with a string of victims across the country. His method was always the same: target wealthy, lonely women, seduce them, gain their trust, and then disappear with their money. The paintings, the romance, the declarations of love, it was all performance art of the most cruel kind. But this case was different. This time, Martin hadn't just planned to steal Elena's inheritance. He had planned to kill her. The private investigator showed Elena a recording from a bug they'd placed in Marcus's phone. Elena listened in horror as the man she loved discussed her murder with cold, clinical detachment. "The inheritance will transfer to me as her husband," Marcus's voice said through the static. "A tragic accident. Maybe she falls down the stairs. Maybe a break-in gone wrong. I haven't decided yet. And you're sure she signed the papers?" asked another voice Elena didn't recognize. "Marriage certificate, will, everything. She trusts me completely. The poor, stupid girl actually thinks I love her." Their laughter felt like ice water in Elena's veins. Elena learned that Marcus had done this before. 3 times before, in fact. Sarah Chen in Portland, a car accident. Maria Santos in Phoenix, an apparent suicide. Jennifer Walsh in Denver, a home invasion. All wealthy women, all alone in the world, all dead within months of marrying Martin Blake. Elena was supposed to be number 4. Pause for dramatic effect. That night, Elena made a decision that would haunt her for the next 15 years. She could have gone to the police, but she knew Martin was careful, clever. He would slip away, reinvent himself again, find another victim. The evidence was circumstantial at best. No, Elena decided. Justice wouldn't come from the courts. She would give Martin Blake exactly what he had given her: a performance. A lie wrapped in love, a betrayal disguised as trust, and she would make him pay in the most poetic way possible. Elena began her own performance. She played the loving, trusting girlfriend while secretly planning Martin's destruction. She documented everything, recorded conversations, copied files, photographed evidence. But more than that, she began studying him the way he had studied her. She learned his routines, his fears, his weaknesses. She discovered that for all his coldness, Martin had one genuine terror: the fear of being forgotten, of his art being meaningless. His paintings were the only real thing about him, the only part of himself he couldn't fake. And that's when Elena conceived her masterpiece of revenge. The plan took months to execute. Elena had to be perfect, patient, brilliant. One mistake and she would end up like the others, a name on a gravestone and a story in a newspaper that no one would remember. But Elena Vasquez was no ordinary woman. She had curated masterpieces, recognized genius, understood the power of art to capture truth. Now she would create her own work of art, one painted in justice and framed in revenge. On Valentine's Day, exactly 1 year after they had met, Elena put her plan into motion. She had prepared everything perfectly. The wine was drugged. Not enough to kill, just enough to disorient. The contracts were forged, documents that would make Martin believe he had successfully gotten Elena to sign over her inheritance. and the setting was perfect. Their shared studio, surrounded by all the paintings of her, all the lies rendered in oil and canvas. "I have a surprise for you," Elena told Martin that evening, her voice sweet with false affection. "I've been working on something special." Martin's eyes glittered with what Elena now recognized as greed rather than love. He thought she was about to hand over her fortune. In a way, she was, just not the way he expected. Elena led him to the studio where she had prepared a candlelit dinner. The covered painting, his portrait of her as the Mark, sat prominently displayed, still hidden beneath its cloth. "Before we eat," Elena said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I want to show you what I've been working on." She pulled away a cloth from an easel she had positioned across from Martin's painting. Underneath was her own creation. Not a painting, but a collage of photographs, documents, and evidence. Martin's real identity, his previous victims, his plans for her murder, all of it arranged in a twisted mirror image of his portrait of her. "Surprise," Elena whispered. Martin's face went through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, recognition, rage, and finally fear. He lunged toward Elena, but the drugged wine was already taking effect. He stumbled, crashing into a table of art supplies. "You stupid bitch," he snarled, his mask finally slipping completely. "You think you're so clever? You think you can—" "I think I already have," Elena interrupted. "You see, Martin, while you were planning my death, I was documenting your life. Every conversation, every lie, every threat. It's all here, all recorded, all evidence." Martin tried to reach for his phone, but his coordination was failing. Elena watched with cold satisfaction as the man who had planned to kill her struggled helplessly. "The police are already on their way," she continued. "I called them an hour ago. They'll find you here, drugged and confused, surrounded by evidence of your crimes. Sarah, Maria, Jennifer, they'll finally get justice." But Martin laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Evidence? What evidence? You think they'll believe some scorned woman's fantasies? I'm an artist, Elena, a respected member of the community. You're just a lonely curator who couldn't handle being rejected." Elena smiled, and Martin felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Oh, but I'm not scorned, Martin. I'm not even Elena Vasquez." Dramatic pause, music builds. "My real name is Sarah Martinez. Sarah Chen was my sister." The color drained from Martin's face. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Sarah Chen died in Portland. Car accident. I was there. I planned it. He stopped, realizing what he had just admitted. Elena, no, Sarah, pulled out a small recording device. "Thank you for that confession. It's much clearer than the ones I got with the wire I've been wearing for the past 6 months." Martin stared at her in horror as the pieces fell into place. "You've been playing me, this whole time. Just like you played my sister. Just like you played Maria and Jennifer. Did you really think there would be no consequences? Did you think you could murder innocent women and just move on?" Sarah walked over to Martin's painting of Elena, the one labeled The Mark. With deliberate precision, she tore it from its frame. "My sister was an artist too, you know. Nowhere near as talented as she thought you were, but she had something you'll never have, a soul. When she died, I inherited more than her money, Martin. I inherited her obligation to stop you." Martin tried to speak, but the drugs were winning. His words came out slurred, desperate. You can't prove anything. No one will believe." Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out a folder thick with documents. Police reports from 3 cities. DNA evidence, financial records, testimony from witnesses who saw you with each victim, and most importantly, recordings of you planning my murder. She leaned down close to his face. "I've spent 3 years building this case, Martin. 3 years learning everything about you, becoming everything you wanted Elena to be. I made you love me, trust me, confess to me. I made you destroy yourself." Martin's eyes were growing heavy, but Sarah could see the fear in them. Good. She wanted him to be afraid. She wanted him to feel what Sarah, Maria, and Jennifer had felt in their final moments. "The police will be here soon," Sarah said, standing up. "But before they arrive, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about justice for my sister. This is about art, Martin. You thought you were creating a masterpiece of deception, but I created something better. A masterpiece of truth. As if on cue, sirens began wailing in the distance. The police found Martin Blake exactly as Sarah had planned, drugged, confused, and surrounded by overwhelming evidence of his crimes. But what happened next would prove that even the best-laid plans can have consequences beyond our imagination. Detective Ray Morrison was the lead investigator on the case. He was a 20-year veteran who had seen everything the human soul could produce in terms of darkness and depravity. But the Blackwood case, as it came to be known, would shake him to his core. "I've never seen anything like it," Detective Morrison would later tell reporters. The amount of evidence this woman had compiled was extraordinary. Phone recordings, financial documents, DNA samples, photographs. She had built an airtight case against a serial killer. But Detective Morrison also noticed something that troubled him deeply. Sarah Martinez had inserted herself into a dangerous situation, lived with a killer for over a year, and risked her life to get her evidence. She had also drugged a man and detained him illegally. "I understand her motivation," Morrison said during the investigation. But what she did, it was vigilante justice. She took the law into her own hands. The case became a media sensation. Sarah Martinez was simultaneously hailed as a hero who had stopped a serial killer and condemned as a vigilante who had broken the law. The evidence she had gathered was so comprehensive that Martin Blake was convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. But the story didn't end there. During the trial, something unexpected emerged. Martin Blake, facing multiple life sentences and with nothing left to lose, began to tell a different version of events. A version that cast doubt on everything the public thought they knew about Sarah Martinez. "She's not the victim she pretends to be," Martin testified from the witness stand. "Sarah Martinez isn't some grieving sister seeking justice. She's something much more dangerous." Martin's lawyer, grasping at straws to save his client, pushed for more details. "Sarah Chen wasn't her sister," Martin continued, his voice steady and cold. "Sarah Chen was her lover. They were partners in a different kind of con. Sarah Chen was supposed to help me steal from wealthy marks, then disappear. But she got greedy. She wanted to go to the police, maybe make a deal for herself." The courtroom erupted. Sarah Martinez sat in the gallery, her face pale but composed. Martin continued, "I didn't murder Sarah Chen. I defended myself when she attacked me with a knife. It was self-defense. Everything else, Maria Santos, Jennifer Walsh, those weren't murders either. They were business deals gone wrong, women who were trying to blackmail me after they discovered what Sarah and I were really doing." "And Elena Vasquez?" the lawyer asked. "Elena Vasquez never existed. That was Sarah Martinez playing a role, just like Sarah Chen had done for me in other cities. The only difference was that this time, she was playing it against me instead of with me." The implications of Martin's testimony were staggering. If he was telling the truth, then Sarah Martinez wasn't a grieving sister seeking justice for her murdered sibling. She was a criminal seeking revenge against her former partner. Detective Morrison was ordered to investigate Martin's claims. What he found would change everything. There was no record of Sarah Martinez and Sarah Chen being sisters. In fact, there was evidence that they had been romantic partners for over 5 years. Sarah Chen had been arrested twice for fraud, and there were financial records suggesting she and Sarah Martinez had been working cons together across multiple states. But more damning was the evidence Morrison found regarding Maria Santos and Jennifer Walsh. Both women had been involved in online dating scams. Both had been blackmailing older men. Both had connections to Sarah Martinez dating back months before they met Martin Blake. The picture that emerged, Detective Morrison later testified, was of a complex criminal operation involving multiple people running different types of cons. Sarah Martinez wasn't just going after Martin Blake for personal revenge. She was eliminating witnesses and loose ends. The case that had seemed so clear-cut suddenly became a labyrinth of lies, betrayals, and double crosses. Sarah Martinez found herself under investigation for multiple crimes, including conspiracy to commit fraud and potentially even murder. But Sarah Martinez had one more surprise up her sleeve. One final twist that would leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about truth and justice. As Detective Morrison's investigation deepened, Sarah Martinez remained remarkably calm. She agreed to be interviewed without a lawyer, answered questions with seemingly complete honesty, and provided access to her personal records and communications. "I want the truth to come out," she told Detective Morrison during their first interview. "All of it. Because the truth is more complicated than either my story or Martin's story." Over the course of 3 interviews, Sarah Martinez told Detective Morrison a story that was more complex and heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Sarah Martinez and Sarah Chen had indeed been lovers, not sisters. They had indeed been involved in criminal activity, but not the way Martin Blake had described. "We were victims first," Sarah explained. "Both Sarah and I had been targeted by con artists when we were younger. Sarah was defrauded of her inheritance by a man who promised to marry her. I was swindled out of my life savings by someone who claimed to love me." According to Sarah Martinez, she and Sarah Chen had developed their criminal enterprise as a form of vigilante justice. They would target men who preyed on women, particularly older, wealthy women. But instead of stealing from innocent victims, they would identify and punish predators. "We would research our targets for months," Sarah explained. "We only went after men who had a history of defrauding women. Men like Martin Blake." Detective Morrison was skeptical, but the evidence began to support Sarah's version of events. Maria Santos and Jennifer Walsh hadn't been innocent victims of Martin Blake. They had been accomplices in various dating scams, but they hadn't been working with Sarah Martinez to defraud innocent people. They had been working with her to target criminals. "Maria and Jennifer weren't blackmailing random men," Sarah continued. "They were gathering evidence against men who had defrauded other women. The money they took was restitution, not theft. We would return it to the original victims." Detective Morrison requested financial records, and what he found was stunning. Over the course of 5 years, Sarah Martinez and her network had returned over $2 million to women who had been defrauded by romance scams and other cons. But there was still the matter of the 3 deaths Sarah Chen discovered, that Martin was planning to kill his victims, not just rob them, Sarah explained, her voice breaking for the first time. "She wanted to go to the police immediately, but we had no evidence that would hold up in court. Martin was too careful, too smart." According to Sarah, Sarah Chen had decided to gather evidence the same way Sarah Martinez would later do, by becoming Martin's target. But Martin had discovered her true identity. "He didn't kill her in self-defense," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "He tortured her. He wanted to know how much we knew, who else was involved. Sarah died trying to protect me and the other women in our network." As for Maria Santos and Jennifer Walsh, Sarah claimed they had been murdered by Martin when they got too close to exposing his operation. "Martin didn't just kill lonely women for their money," Sarah said. "He killed anyone who threatened to expose him." Maria and Jennifer weren't his victims in the traditional sense. They were investigators who got too close to the truth. Detective Morrison spent weeks verifying Sarah's claims. He interviewed dozens of women who claimed to have been helped by Sarah's network. He traced financial records that showed money being returned to fraud victims. He even found evidence that Sarah Chen had been tortured before her death, contradicting Martin's self-defense claim. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, Martin Blake himself. Facing the possibility that his version of events was falling apart, Martin decided to tell the complete truth. And the complete truth was worse than anyone had imagined. "Fine," Martin said during a final interview. "You want the truth? Sarah Martinez is telling the truth about most of it. Sarah Chen was investigating me. Maria Santos and Jennifer Walsh were working with her. I killed all 3 of them because they were going to destroy my operation." "What operation?" Detective Morrison asked. "I wasn't just targeting random wealthy women," Martin admitted. "I was part of a larger network. We had dozens of operators across the country. We were stealing millions of dollars a year from lonely women." Martin went on to detail a criminal enterprise that spanned multiple states and involved dozens of criminals. Sarah Martinez and her network hadn't just been targeting Martin Blake, they had stumbled onto one of the largest romance scam operations in the country. "Sarah Martinez cost us everything," Martin said, his voice filled with rage. Her little network of do-gooders destroyed a multi-million-dollar operation. She didn't just want revenge for Sarah Chen. She wanted to burn our entire organization to the ground. And she had succeeded. Detective Morrison's investigation ultimately revealed that Sarah Martinez's 3-year campaign against Martin Blake had led to the arrests of over 30 people involved in various romance scams. The evidence she had gathered had helped return over $5 million to victims and had shut down criminal operations across multiple states. But it had come at a terrible price. The legal proceedings that followed would drag on for over 2 years. Martin Blake was ultimately convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. 37 other individuals were arrested and convicted based on evidence gathered by Sarah Martinez and her network. But the question of Sarah Martinez herself remained complicated. She had broken numerous laws in her quest for justice. She had engaged in fraud, identity theft, illegal surveillance, and false imprisonment. She had operated outside the legal system and taken justice into her own hands. Yet, she had also stopped a serial killer and dismantled a criminal organization that had defrauded hundreds of women out of millions of dollars. The district attorney faced an impossible choice: prosecute a woman who had risked her life to stop criminals, or ignore the fact that she had broken the law to do it. In the end, Sarah Martinez was charged with multiple misdemeanors related to identity fraud and illegal surveillance. She pled guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 3 years probation and 1,000 hours of community service. But the real punishment was something the court couldn't impose: the knowledge of what her quest for revenge had cost her. During the final hearing, Sarah Martinez addressed the court. "Your Honor, I want to be clear about something. I didn't do this for justice. I did it for revenge. I wanted Martin Blake to suffer the way Sarah Chen suffered, the way all his victims suffered. I wanted him to feel helpless and afraid." She paused, her voice trembling. "But revenge isn't justice. Revenge is just pain creating more pain. I got my revenge. Martin Blake will die in prison. But Sarah Chen is still dead. Maria Santos and Jennifer Walsh are still dead. And I've become something I never wanted to be. Someone who believes that the ends justify the means." The judge, a veteran of 30 years on the bench, was visibly moved. "Ms. Martinez," he said, "this court has rarely seen a case as complex as yours. You have done terrible things for noble reasons, and noble things for terrible reasons. You have saved lives and destroyed lives. You have upheld justice and perverted justice." He looked directly at Sarah Martinez. "But most importantly, you have reminded this court that the line between justice and revenge is thinner than we like to believe. And that line, once crossed, changes us in ways we can never undo." Soft, melancholic music begins after the hearing. Detective Morrison spoke with reporters. Sarah Martinez isn't a hero or a villain. She's a woman who was pushed past her breaking point and chose to fight back in the only way she knew how. Was she right? Was she wrong? I honestly don't know anymore. Sarah Martinez disappeared from public view after her sentencing. Some say she continued her work helping fraud victims through legitimate channels. Others claim she moved abroad and started a new life under a different identity. But those who knew her best say that the woman who emerged from that courtroom was fundamentally different from the one who had entered it 3 years earlier. The quest for revenge had achieved its goal. Martin Blake was in prison. His network was destroyed, and his victims had found some measure of justice. But revenge, as Sarah had learned too late, is a poison that destroys everything it touches, including the person who chooses to drink it. The last person to see Sarah Martinez was Detective Morrison, who encountered her at a coffee shop 6 months after the trial. "Do you regret it?" he asked her. Sarah considered the question for a long moment. "I regret that Sarah Chen died," she finally said. "I regret that I couldn't find another way to stop Martin. I regret that I became someone capable of the things I did." She paused, staring out the window at the busy street. "But do I regret that Martin Blake will never hurt another woman? Do I regret that his victims got their money back? Do I regret that a criminal organization was destroyed?" She looked at Detective Morrison with eyes that held more sadness than anger. "No, I don't regret that, and I think that might be the most frightening thing of all." 5 years have passed since the trial of Martin Blake. The case has been the subject of documentaries, books, and countless true crime podcasts. Legal scholars debate whether Sarah Martinez should be considered a hero or a criminal. Ethicists argue about the morality of vigilante justice. Psychologists study the case as an example of how trauma can transform victims into perpetrators. But there's one element of the story that often gets overlooked: the art. Martin Blake's paintings, including his portrait of Elena Vasquez labeled as the Mark, were seized as evidence during the investigation. After the trial, they were supposed to be destroyed, but one painting survived. The portrait of Elena, the one that revealed Martin's true intentions, now hangs in the office of Detective Morrison, who retired shortly after the case concluded. When asked why he kept it, Morrison gives a simple answer. It reminds me that the truth isn't always what it appears to be. That portrait shows a woman Martin saw as a victim, a mark, someone to be used and discarded. But the woman in that painting was stronger than he ever imagined. She was smarter than he ever realized, and she was more dangerous than he ever feared. Morrison pauses, looking at the painting with eyes that have seen too much. But it also reminds me that revenge changes us. The woman Martin painted as his victim became someone capable of destroying him completely. The question is, was that transformation worth it? Music builds to a crescendo. The real Sarah Martinez, wherever she is, remains a mystery. But her story serves as a dark reminder that in the pursuit of justice, we sometimes lose ourselves, that the line between right and wrong isn't as clear as we'd like it to be, and that revenge, no matter how justified it seems, always comes with a price. In the end, Martin Blake got what he deserved, a life sentence for the women he murdered. But Sarah Martinez got something far more complex, the knowledge that she had become exactly what she set out to destroy, and perhaps that's the most chilling revenge of all, not just the destruction of our enemies, but the realization that in destroying them, we have destroyed ourselves. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Dark Revenge Chronicles. If this story has affected you, remember that revenge might seem sweet, but justice is always more satisfying, and sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose forgiveness over vengeance, healing over hatred. Until next time, remember, in the darkness of revenge, even the victor loses.